4 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean, no light, no sound, just pressure and a woman standing alone on the ocean floor in the dark, with the torpedo closing at 40 knots. She doesn't run. She reaches for the device at her feet, a black box that has been sitting here, silent for 11 years, and does something no one in the history of naval warfare has ever done at this depth. She uses it as a weapon on the surface. 4 Navy SEALs are watching the sonar screen, watching the torpedo track curve, watching it detonate. 180 meters off target, one of them says quietly, "She used the black box to kill torpedo." Nobody answers, because nobody knows what to say. They were sent to protect her. They are only now beginning to understand. She never needed protecting. What they don't know yet is why she is really down there, what she found, what she has been building toward for 3 years in silence, what 11 people died to keep buried, and what one woman was willing to descend into the darkest place on earth, alone, to bring back into the light. The apartment was dark, not because she forgot to turn on the lights, because she preferred it that way. Mara Calloway had been sitting at her kitchen table for 3 hours, a cold cup of coffee in front of her, a folder of title charts she wasn't really reading. Outside the window, San Diego Harbor was quiet. The dock lights made long broken lines across the water. She wasn't anxious, she wasn't scared. She was waiting, and she had been waiting for a long time. The phone rang at 2:14 in the morning. She looked at the screen. Government relay format. 7 digits, anonymous prefix, no carrier ID. She had seen that format before. 7 years ago when they first found her. The same cold string of numbers. The kind of number that doesn't exist in any public directory. She let it ring twice, not because she was hesitant, because she wanted one more second of this. The last moment before everything shifted. The last moment where she was just a woman sitting alone in a dark kitchen by the water. She picked up Calloway. A pause. Then a voice. Clipped professional reading from something prepared. "This is Commander's Office, NAVS, we have a signal. Pacific Grid, depth confirmed at 4,112 meters. We need your assessment by 0600. She closed her eyes. "Exactly 1 second. Send the coordinates," she said. "I'll be there." She hung up, stood slowly, walked to the window. The harbor was still. A container ship sat dark at the far pier. A single gull moved across the dock lights and disappeared. Somewhere past the harbor, past the continental shelf, past the place where the ocean floor drops away into something older than human memory, something had woken up, or rather, something had always been awake. It had just finally been heard. She had wondered, in the quieter moments of the last 3 years, whether this call would ever come, whether the signal would rise, whether anyone would know what frequency to listen for. She had spent 26 months making sure the answer to that last question was yes. She went to her closet, pulled out a canvas duffel she had packed 6 months ago and never unpacked, set it by the door. Then she went to the kitchen counter and picked up her keys. But she didn't drive to the base, not yet. There was one stop she needed to make first. There's something people don't understand about waiting. Real waiting, not the impatient kind, not the frustrated kind, but the kind that stretches across years. The kind that requires you to wake up every morning and choose again, to hold something carefully inside yourself without letting it show. That kind of waiting changes you. Not in dramatic ways, not in ways other people see, but slowly, quietly. The way water changes stone. Mara Calloway had been doing that kind of waiting for 3 years. She was 27 years old. She had a master's degree in ocean acoustics from Scripps Institution of Oceanography. She worked for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, cataloging deep-water seismic patterns and studying low-frequency sound propagation in the Pacific Basin. She had 3 peer-reviewed publications. She had a small apartment in San Diego with a view of the harbor. She kept odd hours and didn't talk much at department meetings and was generally considered by her colleagues to be brilliant, a little remote, and deeply committed to her work. All of that was true. Just wasn't complete. What her file didn't say, what no accessible record anywhere in any civilian or standard military database mentioned, was that before NOAA, before Scripps, before any of that, she had spent 2 years inside a program that most people in the Navy had never heard of, a unit called RIL, detachment so classified that its existence was known only to a handful of people above a certain clearance level, and whose members' records were not just sealed from the public, but scrubbed from most internal military systems as well. ARIL had one purpose. They trained people to go where no one else could go, not into combat, not into hostile territory in the conventional sense, down, straight down, into the deep ocean, into the part of the planet that humans understand less than the surface of Mars, Below the thermocline, below the abyssal plane, into pressures that would collapse a standard submarine hull like a paper cup. The program had run for 4 years. It had trained 11 specialists. It had produced findings that, as far as Mara knew, were still classified at a level she had never been given full access to. And then in early 2023, someone had decided it was over, a signature on a document, a unit dissolved, records sealed, people who had served in it reassigned, reclassified, or simply, on paperist, Mara Calloway had been erased. She had received a letter, formal language. Thanks for your service. Transition assistance available. Please sign the attached non-disclosure agreement. She had signed it, and then she had gone home. Enrolled at Scripps, built a new professional identity from careful, legitimate work, taken the NOAA position, made herself useful, made herself trusted, made herself, quietly and methodically, into the one person who would be called when a signal appeared at a very specific frequency, at a very specific depth in the Central Pacific Ocean. She had spent 26 months embedding a detection parameter into the NOAA monitoring grid, a tripwire essentially. A quiet instruction buried in the monitoring software. If you see this frequency, at this depth, in this quadrant, flag it to me first. She had told herself she was being patient. She understood now that she had been being precise. There's a difference. Patience is waiting without knowing when. Precision is building the conditions so that when the moment comes, you are already exactly where you need to be. The call had come. She was exactly where she needed to be. She drove across the bridge to Coronado. The streets were empty. The ocean moved to her left, invisible in the dark. She drove past the quiet houses, past the old Hotel del Coronado lit up on the waterfront, and turned into a neighborhood of low buildings and mature trees 6 blocks from the beach. She parked outside the Coronado Veterans Care Center at 2:47 in the morning. The night nurse at the front desk was a woman named Patricia. Patricia had worked the overnight shift at the care center for 11 years. She had seen family members come in at all hours. The adult children who couldn't sleep, the spouses who needed to sit with someone for reasons they couldn't fully explain. She had learned not to ask too many questions about why someone needed to visit at 3 in the morning. She looked up when Mara came through the door. "He's awake," Patricia said quietly, sitting by the window. "He has nights like this sometimes." "I know," Mara said. "I won't be long." She signed the visitor log, walked down the dim hallway. The carpet was institutional beige. The lights were turned down to their overnight setting, warm enough to see by, dim enough not to disturb. She passed doors with name plaques and photographs, a wreath on one door, a child's drawing taped to another, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges. She stopped at room 14, knocked softly, opened the door. Walter Hayes was sitting in the armchair by the window, 71 years old, broad shoulders that had not fully given in to age. White hair cut close, the way military men kept it long after they stopped being required to. He was wearing pajamas and a cardigan, dark blue, the color of deep water. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, large, deliberate hands. The hands of a man who had made careful, consequential decisions for most of his adult life. He was looking at the window, not out of it. At his own reflection in the dark glass. He heard her come in. He turned slowly, and then, and this was the thing Mara had learned never to take for granted, the thing she was always quietly grateful for when it happened. He recognized her. "Mara," he said. His voice was low, a little rough but clear and present. She crossed the room and sat in the chair across from him. Between them was a small table with a glass of water and a paperback Western with a cracked spine. She was fairly certain he hadn't been reading it tonight. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "I got a call," she said. He nodded, slow and certain, like someone hearing a thing they had rehearsed in their mind many times. "The signal," he said. "Not a question. Pacific grid. 4,112 meters." She paused. "The frequency matches, Walter. It's real." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street. Its headlights swept briefly across the ceiling of the room. Then the room was dim again. "I always thought it would be someone else," he said finally. His voice was unhurried. "Some technician at a monitoring station who didn't know what they were looking at. I thought I'd read about it eventually. In a report somewhere. Or not at all." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't think it would come back to you. It came back to me because I made sure it would," she said. "I wrote the detection parameters into the NOAA grid 2 years ago. Any signal matching that frequency, at that depth, in that quadrant. My name subs." First, he was quiet, then almost to himself. "You planned for this. I had time," she said, simply. Without bitterness, he looked at her for a long moment. There is a particular kind of look that comes with age. Not sadness, exactly. Not pride either. something more complex. Something that carries the weight of years inside it. Years of watching things unfold that you could not stop. Years of holding things that were too heavy to put down and too painful to keep carrying. Walter Hayes had that look. 11 people, he said. Very quietly, 11, she said. He nodded. Once Walter Hayes had served in the United States Navy for 31 years. He had commanded 3 submarines across 3 decades. North Pacific, South Atlantic, the deep cold water south of Iceland. He had made decisions in those years that kept him awake sometimes. Decisions where the math was right but the human weight of it never fully settled. He was a man who understood consequence. But the night of March 17, 2013 was different from all of those. He hadn't been on the Arlington when it happened. He had been ashore. 3 months retired, he had known the crew, had trained some of the junior officers himself, had sailed with others. When the silence came, when the Arlington simply stopped transmitting and the explanation was filed and the file was sealed and the questions were quietly discouraged, he had known, not guessed. Known, and he had been able to do nothing. For 11 years he had carried that. He reached across the small table now, placed his hand over hers. His hand was warm, slightly unsteady, but deliberate. Go, he said. She looked at him. You don't need me to tell you anything, he said. You already know what's down there. You already know what you need to do. He squeezed her hand once. Firm, brief, go, and bring them home. She sat with him for a few minutes after that, not talking, just sitting together in the quiet room while the night moved around them. The harbor somewhere nearby, the ocean beyond that, and below the ocean, below all of it, 11 people who had never been given a real accounting. He thought about what Walter had told her the first time she had dived deeper than 1,000 meters. She had been 24 years old. A training dive, controlled, supervised. She had come back up from Witten 400 meters with her hands shaking slightly inside the suit. Not from cold, from something else. Something she hadn't had a name for yet. Walter had been on the surface platform when they opened the suit. He had looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "The ocean doesn't lie. Everything people want to bury, eventually, sinks down there. And it waits." She had thought it was a metaphor. She understood now he was speaking literally. She said goodbye, walked back down the hallway, signed out, drove back across the bridge toward the naval base with the dark ocean to her left. She did not know, sitting in that car, in that darkness, that when she returned, Walter would not fully recognize her for several weeks. His memory moved like tides now. Some days he knew exactly who she was and what she meant to him. Other days she was a kind stranger who visited and didn't ask him to be anyone he couldn't remember being. She had learned to be grateful for the days the tide came in. Tonight had been one of those days. She drove on through the empty streets. City was asleep around her. She was not. The briefing room was exactly what she expected, fluorescent lights. A long table with chairs on both sides. A projector screen at one end showing a bathymetric map of the Central Pacific. The ocean floor rendered in gradients of blue and gray. The deep trenches shown as near black. The target coordinates marked with a small white circle. 3 people were already seated when she arrived. A civilian intelligence analyst she didn't recognize, a NAVSEA communications officer, and a man in uniform who introduced himself as the mission coordinator without offering a name. They gave her a folder. She read it in just under 4 minutes. The signal had been detected by an automated NOAA sonar buoy 41 hours earlier. Flagged at 11:42 p.m. Pacific Time, frequency 403.7 MHz with a substation coding layer. Depth firmed 4,112 meters by triangulation with 2 secondary buoys. Location, Central Pacific, approximately 800 nautical miles northwest of Hawaii. No shipping lanes. No known underwater infrastructure. No registered activity of any kind in that quadrant. No reason for anything to be broadcasting from that depth, except the reason she knew. She closed the folder. Who else has seen this, she said. Within NAVSEA, 3 people above my clearance level, the coordinator said. The Secretary of the Navy has been informed. It's contained. Why contained? Because we don't yet know what we're looking at. She set the folder on the table. I do, she said. That frequency band with a subsafe encoding layer is specific to deep event recording systems used on Virginia-class submarines. The depth is consistent with the last confirmed position data. The signal pattern is a continuous low-power broadcast, which means the unit's internal power cell is still active and the recording is intact. She looked at him evenly. You called me because I'm the only person with the dive certification and the direct equipment experience to operate an ADS suit at that depth. That's correct. The coordinator looked at her without expression. That's correct. Then I need full operational authority over the dive sequence. I need 48 hours from deployment to retrieval. I need a support vessel with a functional ADS Mark 7 aboard, fully serviced and calibrated. And I need the acoustic monitoring equipment on that vessel to be fully operational. Not partially, not approximately. Already arranged, he said. USS Langford. Modified research platform. Departs 090 from Pier 12. Security, 4-person SEAL team. Mission protection and surface support, she nodded. She gathered her folder. She did not say, had no intention of saying in this room, to these people, this table, that she had been preparing for this exact exchange for 2 years. That the detection parameters she had quietly embedded in the NOAA monitoring grid were built around this specific signal. That she had known, not hoped, not suspected, that this signal would eventually resurface, and that she had spent 26 months arranging herself into exactly the position where, when it did, she would be the one who answered the phone. None of that needed to be said here. She stood. I'll be on the dock at 0830, she said. The USS Langford sat at Pier 12 in the pre-dawn gray. It was not a warship. It looked like what it officially was, a research vessel. Gray-hulled, low profile, about 180 feet long, with a reinforced dive platform at the stern and a cluster of sensor antennae above the bridge. It had been modified over the years for operations that didn't appear in the public record. The below-decks instrument room was twice the size it should have been for a vessel this class, and the power system had been upgraded to handle the kind of draw that a pressurized dive operation required. It smelled of salt water and machine oil. She arrived at 0827. The SEAL team was already on deck. She saw them from the bottom of the gangway. 4 figures in plain civilian clothes, tactical pants, unmarked jackets, but carrying themselves with that particular stillness that comes from serious training. Not rigid, easy almost, but entirely quietly aware of everything around them. She didn't make eye contact. She walked up the gangway, crossed the deck, and went straight below to the equipment bay. She had 11 minutes before departure. The ADS Mark 7 stood in its storage cradle at the center of the equipment bay. It was an imposing piece of machinery, a rigid articulated suit roughly the shape of a human body, built from aluminum alloy and high-density composite. The joints at the knees, hips, shoulders, and elbows were mechanical systems designed to maintain full articulation under pressures that would otherwise make movement impossible. Thruster packs on the torso and calves provided limited mobility at depth. The helmet integrated lighting, sonar, communications, and a heads-up display showing depth, pressure, internal atmosphere, and navigation. The whole unit weighed over 500 pounds. Most civilian operators spent at least 20 minutes just learning the locking sequence on the entry port before they were allowed to touch anything else. Mara started at the helmet seals and worked down. Joint seals, 1 through 14, pressure relief valves, internal atmosphere backup, communications array, all 4 channels, thruster fuel cells, charge level, connection integrity, lighting systems, emergency beacon, the entry port lock sequence, the external camera array. She was running her hand along the left shoulder joint, checking the torque resistance on the secondary seal housing, when she heard someone stop behind her. She didn't turn around. That's an ADS Mark 7, male voice. Measured. Watching, yes, she said. Standard civilian familiarization protocol is 8 hours minimum before any operation. I'm aware. She moved to the right shoulder. A pause. You've done this before, not a question. An observation being offered to see what she would do with it. She checked the right shoulder seal. Moved to the thruster pack connections on the left hip. The Langford departs in 7 minutes, she said. You should probably make sure your team is settled. A longer pause this time, then the footsteps moved away. She let out one quiet breath, then she kept going. The man who had spoken to her was named Garrett Lund, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. Steve Giroux, 18 years of service. The mission manifest listed his deployments by codename only, which told her they were the kind of deployments that didn't get described in plain language. Experienced, contained, and, based on what she had just seen in his eyes when he watched her work through that equipment check, recalibrating something. She read his file that first evening in her cabin. She read the files on the rest of the team. Marcus Thayer, Senior Chief, Communications Specialist, 34 years old, the quiet kind of watchful, the kind that catalogs everything it observes and converts very little of it into speech. Donnie Mercer, Petty Officer First Class, Medical, 30 years old. She had knocked on Mara's cabin door within an hour of departure. When Mara opened it, Danny had said, I'm Danny Mercer. I'm the team medic. If anything goes wrong at depth, I'm who you call. Direct. Practical. No performance in it. Mara had appreciated that. Kyle Trent, special warfare operator, weapons and tactical systems, 36 years old. He had looked at Mara once at the first evening briefing, a single brief assessing look, and then had not looked directly at her again. She filed all of it, said nothing. The Pacific. In the part of the ocean they were crossing, vast in a way that resists description. It isn't just large, it is indifferent. Stretched in every direction to the horizon with nothing to interrupt it. No land, no ship, no variation in the gray-blue surface. The sky above it is enormous. Silence, even with the ship's engines running steady below your feet, has a texture to it. A weight. Most people find the open Pacific unsettling. Mara had always found it clarifying. She spent the first day in the equipment bay and the instrument room. She ran a second full inspection on the ADS. Then she calibrated the ship's acoustic monitoring array, a job the Navissier technical notes listed as a 4-hour task for a qualified specialist. She completed it in 92 minutes, using a calibration protocol she had memorized from a Navy technical manual she'd had access to. During her time in Ariel, Thayer was in the instrument room doorway when she finished. He had been there, she suspected, for about 40 minutes. She straightened up, turned around. He didn't look away or pretend he'd just arrived. That calibration sequence, he said. That's not the civilian NOAA protocol. No, she said. He waited. It's more accurate, I said. He nodded slowly. Willie stayed in the doorway. Where did you learn it? She looked at him for a moment. From someone who taught me well, she said. She picked up her tools and walked past him. That evening's mission briefing was run by Lund Kleen, professional. He laid out the approach, the dive preparation protocol, the surface support procedures. He covered contingency communications. He went through abort criteria. At the end, he looked at her. Questions from the dive specialist? One question, she said. The contingency if the device has experienced positional drift. Passive objects at that depth can displace significantly in thermocline currents over an 11-year period. A brief silence around the table. Lund said, "We have 200-meter search radius in the plan." "That's not sufficient," she said. The thermal gradient differential between 3,800 and 4,200 meters in this part of the Pacific can produce lateral displacement of up to 400 meters from last known position. I'd recommend expanding to a 500-meter acoustic sweep radius before I enter the water. It adds approximately 40 minutes to the pre-dive sequence, but it significantly reduces the probability of a failed retrieval. She said it evenly. Informational, not challenging. Lund held her gaze for a moment. "We'll adjust the plan," he said. He said it without hesitation, but she could see, in the very slight recalibration behind his eyes, that he had not expected the correction, that he was, quietly, updating something. On the second day at sea, Thayer set a tablet on the table beside her in the instrument room, her NOAA personnel file, open. He crossed back to his own workstation without comment. She picked up the tablet, read through her own file, familiar as her own for reflection. Education, certifications, employment history, performance reviews, everything correct. Everything documented, everything beginning at age 24. She carried the tablet to where he was sitting. "You notice the gap," she said. "There's nothing before 24, he said. No school records, no employment, no tax filings, no social media, no medical records outside the military system." He paused. "Nothing, correct," she said. He looked at her. "It is what it is," she said. She set the tablet back down. "Nobody has a file that cleaned by accident," he said, quiet and even, not accusing, just precise. She walked back to her workstation. "No," she said, "they don't." That night, Lund used his secondary secure device. He went into the JAG archive, not the standard personnel database, but the deeper layer, the historical records system that held documents going back to the early Cold War. Search for the signal frequency. 403.7 MHz subsafe encoding. He cross-referenced it with equipment specifications. One document, NAVAL-C Systems Command, 2011. Technical specification for deep water event recording units used aboard Virginia-class attack submarines, not aircraft black boxes. Not civilian maritime equipment, submarine recorders. He pulled the Pacific Fleet deployment records for 2013. Searched for any Virginia-class boat with any kind of incident report, any anomaly, any gap in the records. Arlington SSN 785 Virginia-class. Commission 2013. Status: active. Homeported Naval Station Norfolk. He checked the Norfolk port logs. Arlington was currently listed at pier. Operational and accounted for, so the submarine existed. Was fine. Was docked in Virginia, but something broadcasting on its internal recording frequency was on the floor of the Pacific Ocean. Sat with that for a long time. He searched the hull number in the JAG archive, US Arlington, SN 785. Wrecker sealed. Compartment access rekeeled. He stared at the screen, a working submarine, currently operational, and its own historical records were locked above his clearance level. There is a feeling that experienced military officers develop over years of work. A feeling that doesn't have a clean name, but that every serious operator eventually learns to trust. It's not intuition exactly. It's the accumulation of pattern recognition. The moment when the facts in front of you are each individually defensible, but the picture they make together is not. He was in that moment. He thought about Mara Calloway, the equipment check, the calibration sequence, the search radius correction. The way she had looked at him in the equipment bay, not nervous, not eager to impress, just waiting for him to finish speaking so she could get back to work. Thought about the empty years. He thought about the sealed file. He thought about the recording frequency of a submarine that was, officially, on paper, completely fine. He closed the device. He sat in the quiet operations room for a long time. Ship moved beneath him. The ocean pressed dark and enormous around it. Then he got up, walked down the corridor, stopped for a moment outside her cabin door, didn't knock, moved on. Danny Mercer found Mara on the aft deck just after 2200. The sky was clear. Stars thick overhead, the kind of sky you only see far from land, far from any light source, in the middle of an ocean so vast that civilization feels like a rumor. Ship's wake spread out behind them, phosphorescent white in the darkness. The water moved around them with the patient, enormous rhythm it had maintained for millions of years before any of them were born. Danny came out with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Mara without asking if she wanted it. They stood at the rail. Drank. Didn't talk for a while. You're not nervous, Danny said finally. It wasn't a challenge. Just an observation. The same way a good medic makes observations. Calm, interested, without judgment. No, Mara said, most people would be, Danny said. Going down 4,000 meters alone. Mara looked at the water. I've been deep before. How deep? A beat. Deep enough. Danny sipped her coffee. The ship creaked softly. Somewhere below them, the engines ran steady and low. Can I ask you something? Danny said. Yes, why you? She said. There are Navy divers. There are research submersibles. There are people whose entire job is deep retrieval operations. She paused. Why is it a NOAA acoustics engineer who gets the call? Mara was quiet for a moment. This was a fair question. It was also a question she had prepared for. Not because she planned to lie, but because she had thought carefully about what was true and what was sayable, and where those two things overlapped. Because the signal is in a frequency range I specifically study, she said. And because the equipment configuration required for this depth is something I have direct experience with. I'm a technical match. Danny nodded slowly. She seemed to be turning that over, checking it from different angles the way a careful person checks something before they accept it. That's a thorough answer, she said. Yes, it's also not the whole answer. Mara looked at her. Donnie wasn't watching her accusingly. She was watching her the way she probably watched patience, steadily, with patience, waiting for what the surface concealed to show itself in small ways. Mara turned back to the water. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm afraid of being too late, she said. Her voice was steady. Low, not of the depth, not of anything that could happen to me down there. She paused. There's something at 4,112 meters that has been waiting for 11 years, and I'm afraid of being the person who could have gotten there sooner. And didn't. Danny didn't say anything for a moment. The phosphorescent wake spread out behind the ship and slowly dissolved into the dark water. What's waiting down there? Danny said. Mara looked at her. 11 people, she said, and the truth about what happened to them. Danny was still. She didn't push, didn't press, didn't ask for more than Mara had offered. She just held the information quietly, the way a good person holds something serious, carefully, with both hands, without dropping it or throwing it. They stood there until their coffee was cold. Then Danny said quietly, Whatever is down there, I'll be on that deck when you come back up. It was a simple thing to say. A practical thing, but Mara understood it for what it was, a commitment. The kind that didn't need ceremony. Thank you, she said. Donnie went back inside. Mara stayed at the rail. She thought about Walter, about his hands on the armrests of the chair in that dim room in Coronado, about the way he had said go, not with drama, not with urgency, just with the quiet weight of a man who had waited 11 years to say it. She thought about 11 people. She thought about the darkness below her, about 4,112 meters of water pressing down on whatever was sitting on that ocean floor, pressing with the indifferent geological patience of the deep sea. About the cool down there and the silence and the absolute black that no light ever reached. And she thought about what Walter had told her years ago, about what the ocean keeps, about how the deep water doesn't destroy the things that sink into it. It preserves them, holds them perfectly still. In the cold and the dark and the pressure, things survive down there that would decay in weeks on the surface, including the truth. She reached into the pocket of her jacket, pulled out a small object, held it in her palm. It was a challenge coin, old, the edges worn smooth from years of handling. On one face, an anchor with wings, the insignia she had been issued the day she completed her aerial certification dive. On the other face, 11 names, laser engraved in small, precise letters, circle around a single word, remember. She had carried it for 3 years. She held it for a moment in the dark, above the dark water. Then she put it back in her pocket. Tomorrow she would go down. Tomorrow she would find what they had tried to bury it for, 112 meters, and she would bring it back up into the light. Back in the operations room, Garrett Lund was still awake. He had the mission file open. He had been through it 6 times now. Every page, every technical specification, every piece of documentation on the signal, the target coordinates, the equipment manifest. He kept coming back to one thing: the frequency. He had served in the Navy for 18 years. He had worked alongside intelligence operations, technical surveillance programs, signals collection teams. He knew frequency bands the way a musician knows notes, not as abstract numbers, but as things that meant something. Things belong to specific systems, specific contexts, specific purposes. 403. 7 megahertz with a subsea encoding layer was not a number he recognized from any civilian maritime standard. He had done the search. He had found the 2011 NAVSE specification document. He had confirmed what it meant. He had sat with the sealed Arlington record, and now he was sitting with all of it together. The frequency, the submarine, the sealed record, the woman in the cabin 2 doors down with the empty years in her file, and the equipment competency that had no civilian explanation. Thought about the moment in the briefing when she had corrected the search radius. She hadn't said it to demonstrate anything. She hadn't said it to position herself or to challenge him. She had said it because it was correct, because she knew it was correct from experience, because at some point in her life she had been in a situation where getting that number wrong would have mattered. He thought about the calibration sequence, the NAVSE protocol, not the NOAA standard. Thought about the sealed record. He thought about the phone call at 2 a.m. that she had answered on the second ring. He put the file down. He looked at the overhead for a moment. He had commanded people in difficult situations for a long time. He had learned, the hard way, as most things worth knowing are learned, that the people who performed best under pressure were not always the people who performed best in the briefing room. That competence showed itself in particular moments, that the quality that actually mattered, when the conditions were extreme, was not strength or aggression or even technical skill. It was something quieter than that: control, the ability to remain who you were when everything around you was working to make you into someone else. He had seen that quality in people a handful of times in his career. He had seen it this morning in the equipment bay, in the way she had moved through that ADS inspection, in the way she had answered his observation, "You've done this before." By not answering it at all and going back to work, he exhaled slowly. He closed the mission file. He was going to let her dive tomorrow, not because he had been ordered to. He had been ordered to protect her and support the operation. He could have raised questions that would have delayed the dive. He could have escalated to NAVSEA and bought another 48 hours. He was not going to do that, because whatever Mara Calloway was, and he understood now that she was not what her file said she was going down to that depth for a reason that was larger than this mission, a reason that had been driving her for years. He didn't fully know what it was yet, but he understood one thing clearly. She was not the person he had been sent to protect. She was the person the mission depended on. He turned off the light in the operations room, walked down the corridor. Ship moved around him, steady and quiet. The Pacific pressed against the hull from all sides, 500 feet of water above the seafloor here, give or take. Shallow compared to where they were going. He went to his cabin. He lay down on his bunk without undressing. He looked at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would go down, and whatever had been waiting at 4,112 meters, whatever signal had been broadcasting steadily and patiently into the dark for 11 years, waiting for someone who knew the right frequency to listen, would finally have someone coming to answer it. He just didn't fully understand yet what that meant. He understood. in the way that careful people understand things before they can fully articulate them, that everything he thought he knew about this mission was incomplete, and that the woman who was going to change that, the woman who had been preparing for this moment for 3 years while the rest of them were looking the other way, was sleeping quietly 2 doors down the corridor, or not sleeping, probably not sleeping, probably lying exactly as he was, eyes open in the dark, listening to the ship, listening to the ocean reedy outside. The Pacific moved the way it always had, enormous, indifferent to the small human things that crossed its surface. But below the surface, far below, past the thermocline, past the abyssal slope, in the absolute darkness of the deep plain, something was transmitting, a signal, quiet and steady and waiting. It had been waiting for 11 years. Tomorrow, someone was finally coming. The ship reached the coordinates at 4:47 in the morning. Nobody announced it over the intercom. There was no ceremony. The engine simply changed pitch, a subtle reduction in RPM as the Langford slowed to station-keeping position, and anyone who had been sleeping lightly enough would have felt it in their bones before they heard it. Mara felt it. She was already dressed. She had been sitting on the edge of her bunk for an hour in the dark, doing nothing in particular, not reviewing technical specs, not running through checklists in her head, just sitting, breathing, letting the stillness of the ship settle into her. This was something Walter had taught her. Before any deep dive, he had said, you need to find the quiet inside yourself first. Not the forced quiet of someone suppressing anxiety, the real quiet. The kind that comes when you accept, fully and without reservation, that you are about to enter a place that does not care whether you survive it. The ocean isn't hostile, he had told her once. It's just indifferent. And there's something freeing about that, if you let it be. She had let it be. She stood up, picked up her gear bag, walked out of the cabin. The equipment bay was lit and warm when she arrived. The ADS Mark VII had been moved from its storage cradle to the deployment platform, a raised section of decking at the stern that could be hydraulically lowered to water level. 2 technicians from the Langford's crew were running final system checks on the suit's external systems. They looked up when she came in. Internal atmosphere is good, one of them said. Comms are up on all 4 channels. Thruster fuel cells at 94%. Battery backup, she said. 6 hours at full draw, she nodded, set her bag down, started pulling on the thermal underlayer, a full-body compression suit designed to maintain core temperature in water that sat at 4,000 meters at approximately 2 degrees Celsius. The rest of the team arrived within minutes. Thayer came in first, went straight to the communications console, and began setting up the surface relay. He had the acoustic tracking array running in under 3 minutes. She had watched him work over the past 4 days. He was good, efficient. He didn't waste motion. Danny Mercer came in next. She set up the medical monitoring station on the starboard side of the bay, a compact unit that would track Mara's biometrics through sensors built into the thermal underlayer. Heart rate, blood pressure, core temperature, oxygen saturation. If anything went wrong inside the suit, Danny would see it on her screen before Mara felt it. Kyle Trent came in last. He checked the deck equipment, tested the retrieval cable, ran through the emergency ascent procedure documentation, said nothing to anyone. Garrett Lund stood near the entry to the bay, arms crossed, watching everything. When Mara began the entry sequence for the ADS, backing into the suit, locking the lower body sections, beginning the sequence of seal engagements that secured the torso, and then the helmet. He moved to stand a few feet away. He didn't offer to help. He seemed to understand, from watching her over the past 4 days, that she didn't need help. He was simply present. Paying attention, she completed the entry sequence. The helmet locked with a solid, satisfying click. The heads-up display initialized. Depth gauge, 0. Internal atmosphere, nominal. Communications active. His voice came through the helmet comm. Clear and close, Calloway. Radio check clear, she said. Surface team is ready. Thayer has you on acoustic tracking. If you lose comms, we track you by transponder. If transponder goes down, we hold position and wait for your beacon. Understood. A pause. Then, is there anything you need before you go in? She thought about that for a moment. No, she said. There's nothing I need up here. She heard him exhale. Very quietly. Then we'll see you on the other side, he said. The deployment platform began to lower. The water, when it closed over her, was black. Not dark, black. The difference matters. Dark is the absence of light. Black at that depth is a presence, a weight. Presses against the suit's external sensors in a way that registers almost as sound. A deep structural silence that you feel more than hear. She descended at a controlled rate. 40 meters per minute. Thrusters provided just enough counterforce to keep her oriented, feet down, head up, the suit's gyroscopes maintaining attitude against the current 120 meters. The last blue-gray light from the surface vanished, 20 meters. Total darkness. She switched on the external lighting array. 2 broad beam LEDs on either side of the helmet, and a focused forward beam mounted on the chest plate. In the open water, they illuminated nothing except particles, the constant slow drift of marine snow, tiny organic fragments falling from the surface world above, a gentle and perpetual rain of the dead. She watched it for a moment. There was something beautiful about it, something that always caught her, no matter how many times she had descended through it. The particles drifted past the suit's lights in long, slow curves, following the invisible currents of the deep water column. Each one a fragment of something that had once been alive near the surface, drifting down. Joining the sediment of the deep floor, everything eventually descended 500 meters. The water temperature dropped below 10 degrees Celsius. She felt it through the thermal underlayer, not as cold exactly, but as a pressure. Reminder that the environment around her was becoming actively hostile to human biology. She breathed steadily, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The recycled atmosphere inside the suit tasted faintly of metal and oxygen scrubber chemicals. She had always found the smell oddly comforting. It meant the suit was working. 1,000 meters, Lund's voice in her helmet. Callaway. Depth check 1,000 meters. Descent rate nominal. All systems good, copy. We have you on acoustic. Signal strength is strong. She kept descending. She thought about the Arlington. The USS Arlington had been commissioned in 2013, one of the newer Virginia-class boats, nuclear-powered, 377 feet long, built for fast attack operations in deep water. It had a crew of 135. Virginia-class was considered one of the most capable submarine platforms in the world. Quiet, maneuverable, designed to operate in the kind of deep ocean environment she was descending into. On March 17, 2013, the Arlington had been conducting operations in this part of the Pacific. What those operations involved, Mara did not know fully. She had pieced together fragments over 3 years, partial records, cross-reference documents, careful testimony of Walter Hayes, who had known the boat's commanding officer personally. She knew that Operation Quietwater had been running for approximately 8 months before March 17. She knew it involved signals intelligence collection in the deep water column, acoustic surveillance of a kind that required the Arlington to operate at unusual depths for extended periods. She knew that the operation had produced findings. She knew that someone had decided those findings needed to disappear. She knew that 11 people had been inside the Arlington when that decision was implemented. The official record said nothing. The official record, in fact, didn't acknowledge that anything had happened to the Arlington at all. The boat was operational. The boat was docked at Norfolk. Everything was fine. Everything had always been fine. She breathed 2,000 meters. The pressure outside the suit was now approximately 200 atmospheres. Enough to crush an unprotected human body instantly. The ADS held. The seals held. The mechanical joints moved smoothly through the small corrections she made to maintain orientation. She thought about the 11 names on the coin in her jacket pocket, up on the ship. In the cabin she had left clean and ready to return to. I'm coming, she thought, not as a promise to the dead. She was a scientist. She understood what death was, as a commitment to the record, to the truth, to the idea that what had happened to those 11 people deserved to be known, not buried at the bottom of an ocean, not sealed in an archive above everyone's clearance level, not dissolved into silence by the weight of someone's decision. The truth deserved to come up. She was going to bring it up. 3,000 meters, Callaway, Lund's voice. You're at 3,000. How are you doing? Good, she said. Suit is nominal. I'm starting the acoustic sweep for the target. She activated the forward sonar array, a set of acoustic sensors built into the chest plate that could map the seafloor ahead in a 500-meter radius. Display in her helmet populated slowly with a three-dimensional rendering of the ocean floor below her. Flat, silted, featureless in the way that truly ancient places are featureless. The texture of a surface that has not been disturbed in geological time. And then, on the sweep, 340 meters northeast of her current position, a hard return, something solid. Something that did not belong to the natural geometry of the seafloor. She adjusted her descent angle slightly. Move toward it. Surface, she said. I have a contact on the acoustic sweep, 340 meters northeast, bearing 047. I'm adjusting approach, copy, Lund said. We see it on the relay. Moving toward the contact, yes, 3,500 meters, the water temperature was now less than 3 degrees Celsius. Darkness outside the suit was total and permanent. No light from the surface had reached this depth since the ocean formed. The only illumination was her own, the LED arrays painting a small cone of visibility ahead of her, the rest of the world invisible. She had always found a strange peace in this. Up on the surface, the world was loud and complicated. There were files and briefings, and people who looked at her with the careful eyes of people trying to figure out what she was. There were things she could say and things she couldn't say, and the constant management of the distance between those two categories. Down here, none of that existed. Down here, there was only the descent, the pressure, the silence, and the simple, physical fact of moving towards something 800 meters. She could see it now. Not clearly, not yet, but the forward beam caught the edge of it. A shape in the sediment below her. Dark against dark, but with the particular solidity of manufactured object against natural seafloor. Hard angles in a world of soft curves. Her heart rate, steady at 68 beats per minute for the entire descent, ticked up to 71. She kept descending. She touched down at 4,112 meters at 7:23 in the morning. Pacific time, the landing was soft. The sediment at this depth was fine and silted. Millennia of accumulated marine snow compressed into something with the texture of talcum powder. Suit's feet sank slightly, then held. She adjusted the thrusters to neutral buoyancy and stood on the floor of the Pacific Ocean. She stood still for a moment. There is something that happens when you stand on the deep ocean floor, something that isn't in any training manual and can't be prepared for. It's the weight of it. Not the pressure, the ADS handled that, but the knowledge of where you are. Fact of standing in a place that has been dark and silent and untouched since before human beings existed. A place so remote from the surface world that the concepts of day and night, weather, politics, fear, all of it becomes theoretical. You are, at that depth, alone in a way that is difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't felt it. Mara let herself feel it for exactly 10 seconds. Then she turned on the full forward lighting array and looked at what was in front of her. The device was 11 meters ahead of her. It had settled into the sediment at a slight angle, maybe 15 degrees off vertical, which suggested it had drifted slightly from its original landing point during the descent. Sediment around it was undisturbed except for a subtle compression ring at its base, the record of its impact with the seafloor 11 years ago. No marine growth on its surface. At this depth and temperature, biological fouling was minimal. It's approximately the size of a large suitcase. It was black, not the orange of a commercial flight data recorder, not the yellow of a standard maritime emergency beacon. Black, matte, non-reflective, with a housing that she recognized immediately from the Ariel technical training she had received in 2021, SACE recording device Type 7, Virginia-class configuration. She moved toward it carefully. The thrusters kept her balanced. Footsteps in the sediment were slow. 3 to 4 seconds per step, but deliberate. She reached the device. She crouched in front of it, the suit's knee joints moving smoothly under the hydraulic assist, and brought her forward lighting to full intensity. On the side of the housing, just above the data port access panel, a mounting identification plate, titanium, rated for indefinite deep water exposure. She used the suit's arm-mounted UV light, a secondary tool included for material analysis, and played it across the plate. The letters appeared slowly, pale against dark. U.S. Airlinkson, SN 785 Deep Water Event, Rekordsupport Type 7, Phi 004. She crouched in front of it, the Arlington. She had spent months working through the logic of it. The submarine currently docked at Norfolk bore the same name, the same hull number. But hull numbers, she had learned during Ariel, could be administratively reassigned after a vessel was declared lost in classified circumstances. The boat at Norfolk was a replacement, commissioned quietly, given the same designation so the original's disappearance would never appear as a gap in the registry. It was a clean solution, bureaucratically elegant. The kind of solution that only works when nobody asks the right questions. She had asked the right questions. She had known it would be here. She had spent 3 years building toward this moment. She had prepared for every technical contingency. She had run the calculations. She had embedded the detection parameters. She had arranged herself, carefully and deliberately, into the position of being the person who answered the phone. Still, seeing those letters in front of her in the absolute silence and darkness of 4,112 meters, something moved in her chest that she had not fully anticipated. It was grief, mixed with something that wasn't quite relief but was adjacent to it. Factually found it. She reached for the data retrieval port. Surface, she said. I have the device. Confirmed ID. USS Arlington, SSN 785. Subsafe Type 7, Serial 004. Initiating data retrieval sequence, a pause on the comm. Then Lund's voice. Copy, Callaway. Confirmed ID on Arlington, another pause. How does it look? Intact, she said. Excellent condition. 11 years at this depth in near-freezing water. The housing is perfect. The data cell should be fully preserved. She opened the access panel. Connected the retrieval cable from the equipment pack on her suit's left hip. The device's indicator light, dormant since its power cell had dropped to minimum broadcast mode, pulsed once, twice, then held steady. Connected. Transfer initiated, she said. Estimated time, 14 minutes, copy. Standing by, she settled into a waiting position, suit thrusters holding her stable, sediment undisturbed around her, and watched the transfer progress indicator in her helmet display tick upward. 1%, 2, 3. She was at 7% when Thayer's voice came through the comm, not calm, not his usual measured delivery. Something else, Callaway, a beat. We have a contact. She heard the change in his voice immediately. What kind of contact? She said, acoustic. Underwater. Moving fast from the northwest, bearing 312, approximately 6,000 meters out and closing. A pause she didn't like. It's not biological. She processed that point 6,000 meters out. Moving fast. Non-biological acoustic signature. Speed, she said. Approximately fort. She stayed completely still, the fortsets. Underwater. Non-biological, that's an active homing torpedo, she said. Yes. Thayer's voice was controlled now, but flat in a way that meant he was working hard to keep it that way. Mk-48 profile. Active sonar homing. Current track puts intercept at your position in approximately. A brief pause. 6 minutes 40 seconds. She looked at the transfer indicator. 8%. She did the calculation instantly. 14 minutes for full transfer at current rate. She had 6 minutes 40 before intercept. She could abort, disconnect, attempt emergency ascent. But at 4,112 meters, full emergency ascent took a minimum of 90 minutes to avoid fatal decompression injury. She would never reach a safe depth in time. She could not outrun it. She could not outswim it. She looked at the device in front of her. At the transfer cable. At the indicator ticking upward, 9%, she thought clearly. Precisely. The way Walter had taught her to think under pressure, not suppressing the fear but setting it aside, the way you set aside a tool you don't need right now, to use later when conditions allow. The torpedo was using active sonar homing. It was pinging, sending out acoustic pulses and following the return signal from the hardest target in its acquisition field. The hardest target in this field was her ADS suit. 500 pounds of aluminum alloy and composite materials, a very loud acoustic return. But the Subsafe Type 7 device had its own acoustic profile. It had been broadcasting continuously for 11 years. Low power, steady. The signal that had brought them here, its broadcast frequency was in the 403.7 MHz band. The torpedo's active sonar was in a different band entirely. But the Type 7 had a secondary function, one that had been included in the original Subsafe specification for exactly this kind of emergency, an acoustic countermeasures mode. Designed to allow a submarine crew to use the device as an emergency acoustic decoy if the boat came under attack. The function required a specific activation sequence. She had memorized the activation sequence in 2021. Surface, she said. I need you to listen carefully and not interrupt me for the next 90 seconds. A beat. Go, Lund said. The torpedo is using active sonar acquisition. I'm going to activate Type 7's acoustic countermeasures mode. It will generate a false return signature at a displaced position and attempt to redirect the homing solution. If it works, the torpedo will track the false return and detonate away from my position. Silence on the comm. If it doesn't work, Lund said. Then it doesn't work, she said simply. She heard him breathe. What do you need from us? I said. Nothing right now. Keep the comm open. Don't talk. She turned back to the device. The countermeasures activation was a physical process. A sequence of 3 panel releases and a mode toggle on the device's control interface, performed in a specific order within a specific time window. She had practiced it in training, on a device identical to this one in a testing pool at Pearl Harbor, at surface pressure, not at 4,112 meters, not in the dark, not with the suit's mechanical joints and the time pressure of a weapon closing at 40 knots. She opened the secondary panel on the right side of the housing. Her hands moved deliberately. Not fast. Fast was wrong. Precise was right. The first release. The second. He felt the third catch, slightly. Sediment in the mechanism from 11 years on the seafloor. and she applied steady lateral pressure until it gave transfer indicator 11%. She found the mode toggle, a recessed switch beneath a safety cover. She lifted the cover, positioned her manipulator arm over the switch. She heard it in the passive sonar feed in her helmet now. A distant, rhythmic pinging, getting closer. Faster intervals as the weapon's homing system acquired and refined its solution. She threw the toggle. The device's indicator light changed from steady green to a rapid amber pulse. For a moment, nothing. Then the Type 7 emitted a pulse. She felt it more than heard it. A pressure wave through the water that registered in the suit's structural sensors as a faint vibration. The device was broadcasting. Hard, on every frequency in its range, with a modulated return pattern designed to look to an active sonar system like a large metallic object, louder and harder than her suit. At a position 180 meters to her northeast, the pinging in her passive feed changed. It shifted, the interval changed. The bearing changed. The weapon was turning. She watched the acoustic display in her helmet. The torpedo's track curving away from her position, swinging northeast, following the false return like a needle following a magnet. She did not move. She did not breathe for 11 seconds. Then, from 180 meters to her northeast, the ocean floor erupted. She felt it as a pressure wave first, a wall of force that hit the suit hard enough to register on the structural load sensors. Then the sediment around her rose in a slow, enormous cloud as the shock wave propagated through the deep water and reached her position. Her world turned to white static for approximately 4 seconds, then it cleared. The suit was intact. The seals held. All systems nominal. Transfer cable was still connected. She looked at the indicator, 14%. She exhaled. Surface, she said. The countermeasure worked. Torpedo has detonated. I'm intact. Transfer is continuing. The comm was silent for several seconds. Then Lund's voice. Very controlled, very quiet, copy Calloway. You're intact, a pause. What just happened? I used the device's countermeasures function to redirect the torpedo's homing solution, she said. It detonated on the false return approximately 180 meters from my position. Another pause. You used the black box to kill the torpedo, he said. Yes, she heard something that might, on another occasion, have been the beginning of a question. He stopped it. Are you injured? No. Equipment status? All nominal. Transfer at 14%. Approximately 10 minutes remaining, a very long pause. Then, copy standing by. She didn't know what was happening on the ship. She found out later. In the 90 seconds between Thayer's contact report and the torpedo detonation, several things occurred simultaneously aboard the Langford. Thayer tracked the incoming weapon on the acoustic array and relayed Mara's countermeasure instructions to Lund. He followed them precisely, kept the comm open, stayed off the channel, gave her the space she had asked for. Danny Mercer watched the biometric feed from Mara's underlayer sensors. Heart rate, 74 beats per minute, elevated from the dive baseline of 68 but not dramatically. Breathing rate, controlled. Core temperature, holding. She watched the numbers the way a medic watches numbers, knowing that what they showed wasn't the whole story, but trusting them anyway, because they were what she had. The numbers stayed steady. Kyle Trent. 60 seconds between Thayer's report and the detonation, disappeared from the equipment bay. Nobody noticed immediately. There was too much happening. Thayer was at the acoustic console. Danny was at the biometric station. Lund was on the comm. The two ships' technicians were watching the deployment cable. It was Danny who noticed first. After the detonation. After Mara's voice came back on the comm saying she was intact. After the immediate crisis passed and the bay's collective held breath released. She turned to say something to Trent. He wasn't there. She walked to the door of the equipment bay. Looked down the corridor. No Trent. She walked quickly to the communications room. Empty. She went aft to the secondary equipment locker. Empty. She went forward to the bridge. She found him in the satellite communications room, the small compartment off the main corridor that housed the ship's backup satellite uplink. He was at the console. He had a small personal transmitter, no larger than a pack of cards, connected to the auxiliary port. He was typing a transmission sequence. She stood in the doorway. He heard her, turned. They looked at each other for a moment. Danny, he said. His voice was level. What are you transmitting? She said. He didn't answer. She stepped into the room. He didn't move to stop her, which told her something. Either he was done with what he was doing, or he had decided that stopping her wasn't worth what it would cost. She reached past him and looked at the console screen. The transmission log showed a brief outgoing burst. 11 seconds encrypted on a frequency she didn't recognize. He disconnected the auxiliary port. She took the personal transmitter out of his hand. He let her take it. "Come with me," she said. He came. She brought him to the main corridor. Lund was coming out of the equipment bay. She held up the transmitter. Lund looked at it. Then at Trent. "Where did the transmission go?" he said. Trent looked at him steadily. He didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said, "The people who sent the torpedo, they'll know it failed now. They'll know the retrieval is still in progress." He paused. "I didn't have a choice, Commander." "You had a choice," Lund said quietly. "You made it." Trent said nothing else. Lund had him secured in his cabin within 3 minutes. Then he went back to the equipment bay, stood at the comm console, listened to the transfer progress from 4,112 meters below. Thayer was beside him. "The torpedo came from a submarine," Thayer said quietly. "Not a question." "Yes. There's no submarine on the surface contact picture." "No," Lund said. "There wouldn't be." He looked at the acoustic tracking display. The faint signal of Mara's transponder, steady and green, at the bottom of the depth readout. Thought about the sealed Arlington record. He thought about Trent's transmission. He thought about the order that had come in 2 nights ago from Vice Admiral Harlan Moore. Abort the mission. Return to port immediately. He had not responded to that order. He was going to have to think carefully about what that meant, about what came next, about the weight of what was rising very slowly from 4,112 meters, but not yet. Right now, he needed to wait. He was very good at waiting when the situation required it. Stood at the console, and he waited. The transfer completed at 7:58 in the morning. The indicator in her helmet went from 99% to 100%, and the device's amber pulse slowed and steadied back to green. 94 minutes of data fully transferred, compressed, encrypted, stored in the retrieval module on her equipment pack. She disconnected the cable. She placed her manipulator hand on the top of the device for a moment. Just for a moment. The gesture meant nothing technically. The device didn't know she was there. Data didn't know it had been found. But she needed to do it anyway. "Got you," she thought. Finally, then she activated the ascent thrusters and began to rise. The ascent was slower than the descent. It had to be. Physiology of deep diving, even in an ADS where the internal atmosphere stayed at surface pressure, required a controlled rate of ascent to avoid stress on the suit's pressure systems. 40 meters per minute on the way down, 30 on the way up. She had approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes of ascent time ahead of her. She used it, not to review plans, not to rehearse what she would say when she broke the surface, not to think about what happened next. She used it the way she had used the descent, to be in the thing she was doing, to be present with it, to acknowledge what it was. She had found the device. She had the data. She had activated the countermeasures and watched the torpedo curve away from her in the black water and detonate on a ghost. She had done every part of this correctly, and 11 people, 11 names on a coin in her jacket pocket up on the ship, were going to be brought into the light, not brought back. She understood what death was, but brought into the light. There's a difference between dying and being erased, between being lost and being deliberately buried, between a tragedy that the world knows about and grieves, and a secret that the world is never allowed to know existed. 11 people had been given the second kind of death. She was going to give them back the first kind. She passed 3,000 meters. Lund's voice. "Calloway, you're at 3,000 meters. Ascending nominally. Copy," she said. "All systems good. Transfer complete and secured. A beat. Good," he said. Just that. She could hear something in his voice now that hadn't been there this morning. Not exactly different, but additional. Like a man who had spent 2 hours standing at a window watching a storm pass and was still standing there, not quite ready to step away. "Lund," she said, "what happened up there while I was down?" A pause. "Trent," he said. He transmitted. "We found him in Inscrum." She absorbed that. "Who did he transmit to?" she said. "Unknown yet." Encrypted burst. "The torpedo came from something underwater in the northwest. Something that isn't on any surface picture." She kept ascending. "Was anyone hurt?" she said. "No. Everyone is fine." A pause. "We also received an order 2 days ago. Abort the mission. Return to port." I didn't respond to it. She was quiet for a moment. "Who sent it?" "Vice Admiral Harlan Moore." "Vice no." The title settled over her like cold water. Vice Chief of Naval Operations. She had known his name for 3 years. She had known, from the fragments she had pieced together, that the decision to bury the Arlington had come from high. She had not known exactly how high. She had suspected. She had built her plans around the suspicion. But hearing the name said aloud, in Lund's voice, in the comm inside her helmet, while she rose slowly through the black water with the data in her equipment pack, something clarified. Not anger, not shock. Confirmation, the kind that doesn't surprise you but that lands hard anyway. Because there's a difference between suspecting something and knowing it. More, she said. You know the name, Lund said. It wasn't a question, I know the name, she said. She kept rising, 2,000 meters. The water was still black, still cold. Something had changed in the column, the faintest suggestion, more felt than seen, of the vastness above. The knowledge that the surface existed, that the world of light and air and human voices was up there. Waiting, Calloway, Lund said. When you get up here, I need you to tell me everything. I will, she said. I was going to tell you anyway. A pause. You plan to tell me, he said. Yes, why? She thought about how to answer that. Because you're the only person on this vessel who had the authority to abort this mission, she said. You received a direct order from a vice admiral and you didn't take it. I need to understand who I'm working with before I walk into what comes next. A long pause. What does come next, he said. That depends on whether you're with me, she said. The longest pause yet. Then, I'm with you, Calloway. She rose through the dark water, 1,000 meters, 800, 600. At 400 meters, the first traces of light appeared, a deep, greenish-gray gradient above her. The Pacific sky filtered through 400 meters of water. After hours in absolute darkness, it was almost unbearably beautiful. She watched it intensify as she rose, the gray becoming blue, the blue brightening, the marine snow particles catching the light and turning briefly luminous as she passed through them. The surface, she broke through at 10:31 in the morning. The light hit her like something physical. Blue sky, sun, the white caps of the Pacific in every direction, the gray hull of the Langford 20 meters away. She floated for a moment, just breathed. She broke through at 10:31 in the morning. The first thing she saw, when the water cleared from the helmet's external cameras, was the gray hull of the Langford. Second thing she saw was a figure standing at the rail of the dive deck. Not moving, just standing there, waiting. Danny Mercer. She had said she would be there. She was there. The retrieval team brought her to the deployment platform. The magnetic clamps locked. The hydraulics lifted the suit. She felt the weight of the ship's deck beneath her feet again. They opened the entry port from outside. Cold Pacific air rushed in, salty and sharp after hours of recycled suit atmosphere. She stepped out of the suit, her legs held. They always held. It was one of the things she had discovered about herself, that after a deep dive, when most people needed to be helped to a seat and given hot fluids and checked for any sign of that physical distress, she stepped out of the suit and stood. It wasn't toughness. It was the particular kind of stillness that comes from spending a long time somewhere that requires absolute physical control. Your body learns to be still, and stillness, it turns out, looks a lot like strength. The equipment bay was quiet. Lund was standing 6 feet away. Thayer was at the console, running checks. Danny was at the biometric station, watching the readouts from Mara's underlayer sensors shift as she moved in open air. 2 ship's technicians were beginning the post-dive checks on the ADS. No Trent, Mara, and Lund looked at each other. He was a tall man, broad. The kind of physical presence that came from years of serious physical training maintained as discipline rather than performance. He had blue eyes that were, she had noticed over the past 4 days, very still. The eyes of someone who observed carefully and revealed very little. Right now they revealed something, not uncertainty, but the look of a man who had been running his assessment of a situation and had arrived at a result he hadn't expected. She reached into the equipment pack on the suit and removed the retrieval module, held it up. A small black rectangle. Unremarkable. 94 minutes of audio from the deep event recorder of the USS Arlington. We need a secure space, she said. A laptop that's not connected to any network, and we need to do this before anyone else gets a chance to intervene. He nodded once. Follow me, he said. She followed him to the small chart room off the main operations space. A room with no external connections, a single overhead light, and a table barely large enough for 2 people to sit at. She plugged the retrieval module into the port of the ship's air-gapped analysis laptop. The decryption required a 12-character key. She typed it from memory. Didn't hesitate. The files opened. The recording was divided into segments. The Type 7 logged data in 15-minute blocks. She sorted by timestamp, found the block she had been looking for 3 years, March 17, 2013, 2:31 to 0246. She looked at Lund, he looked at the screen. She pressed play. The audio quality was imperfect. 11 years in the deep Pacific had not damaged the data cell, but the original recording conditions, the acoustics of a submarine interior, multiple voices, some at distance from the device, created a layered, slightly compressed sound, but the words were clear, a voice. Command authority in it, clipped and certain. Speaking to someone on a secure channel, confirm receipt of authorization from VCNO. Proceed with termination of quiet waiter protocols. Full no survivors, a pause. Another voice closer to the device, one of the Arlington's crew. Sir, that means the crew is still. I'm aware of what it means. The order stands. Execute. A longer silence. Then a third voice, different from the others. Calmer, speaking with the careful deliberateness of someone who knows they are being recorded, who is making a choice about what the record will contain. My name is Lieutenant Commander David Rice, Executive Officer, USS Arlington. Time is 042 Martin 17/28/13. We are at 4,100 meters in the Central Pacific. I am recording this because I believe it constitutes a lawful order to commit an unlawful act. The command originated with Vice Admiral Harlan Moore, VCNO. The operation designation is Quiet Water. The record of this operation and what it found must not be destroyed. If anyone recovers this device, the recording cut, not with static. Not with technical failure, it simply stopped. Mid-sentence, as if someone had ended it from outside. The chart room was very quiet. Mara looked at the waveform on the screen. At the timestamp where the audio ended, Lund sat across from her. He had not moved during the playback. His hands were flat on the table. Face was unreadable except for something behind his eyes. Something working through what he had just heard and arriving at conclusions she couldn't see yet but could feel the weight of. Rice, he said quietly. David Rice. She said, XO of the Arlington. He knew the device was recording. He said what he said deliberately. He gave us the name. Lund was quiet. Moore, he said. Then, I received an order from Moore 2 nights ago. I know. I didn't respond to it. I know that too. He looked at her. How long have you known Moore's name? 3 years, she said. He absorbed that. Outside, the Pacific moved around the hull of the Langford. The ship creaked softly. The engines idled. What do we do now, he said. She reached into her jacket, pulled out her personal phone. Not the mission-issued device, but her own, which she had kept in her cabin during the dive. She set it on the table. Before I went into the water this morning, she said, I uploaded a copy of the device's directory index, the file structure and metadata without the content, to a NOAA secure server via the satellite uplink. It's not the audio, but it's enough to establish that the device exists and what it contains. She paused. Full audio is now in the retrieval module. I have a backup copy encrypted on this device. And I have a third copy that I transmitted via the NOAA civilian satellite network at 0617 this morning, before we reached the coordinates. Lund stared at her. You transmitted before the dive, he said. I transmitted before I got in the water, she said. To 3 recipients. My attorney, a contact at the Senate Armed Services Committee staff, and the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. She paused. Those transmissions are time-stamped. They're already received. They can't be recalled. He was very still. You planned all of this, he said. I had 3 years, she said. Simply. Without apology, he looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. He wasn't angry. She watched for that. For the particular reaction of a man in authority who has discovered that the situation he thought he controlled has been operating on someone else's architecture. That reaction could go either way. It didn't go that way. He looked at her with the expression of someone who had revised their model of a situation and found the new model, while surprising, more coherent than the old one. You weren't sent here, he said slowly. You arranged to be sent here. Yes, and you needed a witness, he said. Someone with rank. Someone whose account couldn't be dismissed. She looked at him. You didn't withdraw from the mission when you received Moore's abort order, she said. That tells me something. He was quiet. I need you to understand what you're stepping into, she said. When this comes out, and it will come out, the name attached to it is going to be yours as much as mine. You disobeyed a direct order from VCNO. You secured one of your own team members. You stood on this ship while I transmitted classified adjacent materials to civilian recipients. She held his gaze. This is not a small thing. He was still for a long time. Then he looked up. Something had settled in his face. The particular look of a man who has found the thing he was looking for. Not a solution, not an answer, but a place to stand. Those crew members deserved better, he said. Someone needs to say so out loud. He paused. Say so. She held his gaze. Yes, she said. He nodded once. Outside, the Pacific was bright and ordinary in the morning light. The sky was clear. The horizon was a clean line in every direction. Below them, 112 meters below them, the ocean floor was undisturbed again. The sediment had begun to drift back into the hollow where the device had rested for 11 years. What had been buried was no longer there. It was here, on this table, in this room, moving upward toward the light. They had tried to bury it at the bottom of the world. They had not understood who was waiting to go down and get it. The chart room stayed quiet for a long time after the recording ended. Neither of them spoke. There is a particular silence that follows the hearing of something irreversible. Not the silence of people who have nothing to say. Silence of people who have too much, who are sitting with the weight of what they now know, feeling it settle into them the way sanity settles into pot war. Slowly, permanently, Lund was the one who broke it. Not with words, he stood up, walked to the door, opened it. Thayer, he called down the corridor. Thayer appeared within seconds. He always appeared within seconds. It was one of his qualities. Get to the bridge, Lund said. Tell the captain we're changing course. North-northwest. Naval Station Everett, Washington. Best possible speed. Thayer looked at him, then at Mara briefly through the opened door. Yes, sir, he said. And when Lund came back into the chart room, sat down, Everett Mara said, Senate Armed Services Committee has a subcommittee session scheduled in 2 days. Joint hearing on naval oversight and classified program accountability. He looked at her steadily. You already knew that. I did, she said. And you have a subpoena. I have a witness subpoena issued 3 weeks ago through the committee staff, she said, for testimony related to a sealed inquiry into the events of March 17, 2013. She paused. The subpoena exists. It's on record. Nobody can interfere with a witness traveling to comply with a congressional subpoena. Not NAVSEA. Not Vicino, a beat. Not more. He absorbed that. You've been building toward this for 3 years, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the statement of a man recalibrating everything he thought he understood about the last 4 days. 2 years and 8 months, she said. From the day I finished embedding the detection parameters in the NOAA grid. That was when I knew the retrieval was possible. Before that, it was just grief and anger. And not knowing what to do with either, he was quiet. What changed? He said. She looked at the table. Walter, she said simply. He told me something. About a year after Ariel was dissolved. He said, grief without purpose is just suffering. But grief with a direction becomes something else. She paused. He'd had 11 years to think about it. He'd had 11 years of not being able to do anything. And when I came to him with the idea, the detection parameters, the positioning at NOAA, all of it, he didn't tell me it was too dangerous. He didn't tell me to let it go. She looked up. He said, do it right. Do it so it holds. Do it so when it comes out, it can't be undone. Lund was quiet for a moment. He was the Arlington senior command contact, he said. Slowly, putting it together. He was the fleet commander's liaison to the boat in 2013, she said. He knew the crew. He knew what the mission was. And when the silence came, when Arlington went dark and the official explanation arrived, he knew what had happened. He just had no proof, no device, no record. She paused. He had me outside through the chart room's single small porthole. The Pacific moved steadily past. The ship was picking up speed. She could feel it in the deck plates beneath her feet. A subtle increase in vibration. The engines pushing harder, turning north. What happens when we reach Everett? Lund said. I testify, she said. The subcommittee has been quietly investigating the sealed records around March 2013 for 14 months. They have the financial records. They have the communications logs, partial but enough. They have testimony from 3 retired naval officers who have been willing to speak on background for over a year. She set her hand on the retrieval module on the table. They've been waiting for this. The audio, the device ID, the provable connection to Moore's order. He looked at the module. And Moore, he said. Moore is currently the 2nd highest ranking officer in the United States Navy, she said. He has been nominated for CNO. Confirmation hearings start in 6 weeks. She paused. He has spent 11 years being very careful, building a record, covering every track. He killed 11 people and sealed the evidence and promoted himself through the institutional silence he created. She paused again. He's never had to account for any of it. A long silence. Until now, Lund said. Until now, she said. She left the chart room and went to find Danny Mercer. Danny was in the equipment bay. She had finished the post-dive biometric review and was writing up the medical log. She looked up when Mara came in. Looked at her carefully. The medic's instinctive scan. Checking for signs of physical distress that a person might not report. She seemed to find none. Sit down, she said. Not a command. A suggestion from someone who had been doing this long enough to know when suggestion was more appropriate than instruction. Mara sat. Donnie poured 2 cups of coffee from the thermos on the workstation. Handed one over. Trent is secured in his cabin, Danny said. Lund had 2 of the ship's crew put on rotating watch outside his door. I know. He hasn't said anything since I walked him to Lund. She paused. He doesn't seem surprised by what happened. He seems resigned, like a man who placed a bet he knew was wrong and is now watching it play out. Mara held her coffee with both hands. Let the warmth go through her palms. He wasn't working for an enemy, she said. He was working for someone inside the institution, someone who had enough authority over his career, or enough leverage, to make compliance feel like the only option. Danny was quiet. More, she said. Mara looked at her. Danny held her gaze. Steady. She had the expression of someone assembling a picture from pieces that had been arriving over several days, and finding that the picture, now assembled, was exactly as troubling as she had suspected it might be. What happened to those 11 people? Danny said. Mara set down her coffee. She looked at Danny for a moment, at the directness in her face, at the particular quality of her stillness. A medic's stillness, the kind trained by years of being present for things that are very hard to be present for without falling apart. She told her not everything, not the full technical detail, but the essential truth of it. The Arlington, the mission, what Quietwater had found, or what she believed it had found, based on the fragments she had gathered over 3 years, the decision that had been made. The 11 people who had been inside the boat when it was made. Danny listened without interrupting. When Mara finished, Danny sat for a long time. Then she said, "And Walter Hayes has been living with knowing this for 11 years. Yes. Mara said, "How is he still?" Danny stopped herself, reframed. "How does a person carry something like that for 11 years? Mara looked at her coffee. "He told me once," she said slowly, "that the reason he didn't break under it was that he found a purpose for it. He said, the knowledge didn't have to be a burden. It could be a responsibility. The difference was what you did with it." She paused. "He chose to do something with it. He chose to teach me. He chose to pass the responsibility to someone who could act on it." She was quiet for a moment. He said, "I can't go down there anymore. My body won't do it. But you can. And if you're willing, then I'm not carrying this alone. We're carrying it together." The equipment bay was quiet. The ship moved northward. Danny reached across the workstation and placed her hand briefly on Mara's forearm. Just for a moment, then removed it. "He chose well," she said. Mara didn't answer. Something in her chest, something that had been held very tightly for a very long time, shifted slightly, not released. Not yet, but shifted. The Langford ran north through the afternoon and into the evening. Mara spent most of the afternoon in her cabin. Not sleeping. She had learned that sleep after a deep dive required at least a full day before her body would genuinely accept it. But resting, lying on her bunk, letting the vibration of the ship's engines move through the mattress and into her bones, she thought about the recording, about David Rice, Lieutenant Commander, Executive Officer of the USS Arlington, a man who, in the last minutes of his life, or close to them, had chosen to put his name and his rank, and the name of the man who had ordered it into the record, knowing the device was running, knowing that the record might never be found. Speaking anyway, it took something. She had thought about David Rice many times over 3 years. She had never been able to find a photograph of him. The Ariel records she had access to mentioned him only as a cross-reference, one of the 11, a name in a sealed file. But she knew him now. She knew him from 11 seconds of audio, from the particular steadiness of his voice, from the decision he made in those final moments to say something true into the dark, not knowing if anyone would ever hear it. If anyone recovers this device, he had believed it was possible. He had believed even at that moment that the truth was recoverable, that the record could be restored, that the silence wasn't necessarily permanent. He had been right. She lay on her bunk and thought about that, about what it means to believe in the possibility of truth reaching the surface, even when you're the one being buried, about the kind of faith it takes, not religious faith. Not the faith of someone hoping for a miracle, the practical, specific faith of someone who understands exactly how the ocean works, who knows that this at depth are preserved, not destroyed, who knows that the instruments down there are still running, still recording, still waiting, who knows that someone, someday, will know the right frequency to listen for. She pressed her palm flat against the bulkhead beside her bunk, felt the ship's movement through the metal. "I heard you," she thought. "David Rice, XO USS Arlington, I heard you." That evening she went to the operations room. Lund was there. Thayer was at the communications console. The ship was running normally, night watches, navigation systems, the steady routine of a vessel at sea, but the mood was different from the first 4 days. The particular professional distance that had defined the team's relationship with her, the careful separation between the civilian specialist and the military operators, had changed, not disappeared. Changed, the distance was still there, but it was a different kind of distance. The kind between people who have been through something together and haven't yet fully processed what it means. She sat at the operations table. Lund put a chart in front of her. The Washington coast. Puget Sound. Naval Station Everett. We reach port in approximately 31 hours, he said. She nodded. What should I know about what happens when we dock, he said. The subcommittee staff knows we're coming, she said. I sent a confirmation transmission this morning, before the dive. They'll have people at the dock. The testimony is scheduled for 0900 the morning after we arrive. She paused. There may be an attempt to delay or complicate our arrival. Moore has resources. He's been careful for 11 years. He won't go down without trying to protect himself. What kind of attempt? Bureaucratic, most likely. Orders to report to a different facility. A JAG hold on the retrieval data pending review. An argument that the subpoena is procedurally irregular. She looked at him. None of those holds up legally. But they can cause delay. And delay is what he needs, Lund nodded. Thinking Trent's transmission, he said. Moore knows the retrieval succeeded. Yes, he'll be preparing. He's been preparing for 11 years, she said. But he's been preparing to keep the secret, not to answer for it. Those are different preparations, she paused. He's very good at the first kind. He has no practice with the second. Lund was quiet for a moment. You've thought about this, he said. Thought about very little else, she said. He looked at her, held her gaze for a moment. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes, Ariel, he said. The dissolution order. I signed it in early 2023. I was given a document that described a program restructuring, budget reallocation. I wasn't given a reason, he paused. I've been thinking about that. About what it means that I signed it without asking why. She looked at him. You were following institutional procedure, she said. That's not an excuse. No, she agreed. It's not, he absorbed. Who told you to sign it, she said. He looked at the chart for a moment. The order came through NAVSEA administrative channels, he said slowly. But the original authorization, he stopped. More, she said. He looked up. The authorization chain went back to Vicino's office, he said. I didn't look at that part carefully. He exhaled. I just signed it. The room was quiet. You didn't know what you were doing, she said. That's different from Trent, is it? She thought about that honestly. Trent knew. Someone told him enough that he knew, and he chose. You signed a dissolution order that looked like routine administration. You had no reason to question it. She paused. The system that Moore built was specifically designed to make people like you not question it, to make the pieces look separate, to make sure no one person ever had enough to see the whole picture. He was quiet. Until you, he said. I had an unusual advantage. She said, I was one of the pieces. I knew what I was part of, and when they erased me, they couldn't erase what I remembered. He nodded slowly. Then, when this is over, what do you want? She looked at him. It was a simple question, and she found, sitting with it, that the answer was also simple. I want the record corrected, she said. I want the 11 members of the Arlington's crew acknowledged, named. Given the recognition they're owed, she paused. I want their families to know what happened, not the version that was filed. The true version, another pause. And I want the program they died for, whatever Quiet Waiter actually found, to be reviewed by people who have the authority to determine what it means and what should be done with it. She said all of this evenly. Without heat, not revenge, he said. Moore answering for what he did is not revenge, she said. It's the system working the way it's supposed to work. It's what David Rice was asking for when he put his name into that recording. Lund was quiet for a long time, then he nodded once. Definitive. Okay, he said. Ship ran north through the night and the following day. Those 30 hours had a particular quality to them. The mission was effectively over. The retrieval was complete. The data was secured. The course was set. But the destination hadn't been reached yet. They were in the space between, moving, waiting. In that space, things were said that might not have been said in the pressure of the mission itself. Thayer found Mara in the instrument room late that night. She was running a secondary verification of the retrieval data, checking file integrity, confirming the backup copy, making certain that what she had was exactly what the device contained. He came in and sat at the opposite workstation. Didn't say anything immediately, just sat. She had come to understand that this was his way. He was a man who arrived somewhere and waited until the right moment to say what he had come to say. After a few minutes, he said, "The calibration sequence you ran on the acoustic array." "First day, yes," she said. "I looked up the NAVSEA technical manual it came from," he said. "It's a restricted document. Access requires a minimum clearance level of secret compartmented information." She kept her eyes on her screen. I know, she said. You had access to that document during our yell, he said. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. I did some more digging, he said carefully. After the torpedo, after Trent. I had some time, he paused. The dissolution order for Ariel, the original authorization chain, goes back to VC No's office. It was signed by Moore's deputy acting on his direction. She looked up. How did you find that, she said. I'm a communications specialist, he said simply. I know where records live. Even records that someone wanted very much to not be findable, he paused. The timing is interesting. Ariel was dissolved in March 2023. Exactly 10 years after Arlington, she held his gaze. He dissolved the program because he was worried someone in it had figured out too much, she said. Not me specifically at that point. He was cleaning perimeter, making sure there were no loose threads. But you were a loose thread, Thayer said. I was the one thread he didn't manage to cut. She said. Thayer absorbed that, looked at his workstation for a moment. I want you to know something, he said. He said it in the careful way he said most things, as if the words had been examined before being released. Been in this job for 14 years. I've served under people who were. He paused. The institution isn't what Moore is. I need you to know that. Most of the people I've served with are not. I know, she said. I don't think you should leave thinking. Marcus. She used his first name. For the first time. I know. I was in the institution. I know what it is when it works, she paused. What happened to the Arlington is what happens when one person in a position of power decides that the institution exists to protect him, not the other way around. She looked at him steadily. That's not the institution. That's a failure of the institution, and the way you correct it is exactly what's happening right now. He was quiet, then very quietly. David Rice trusted that someone would come. Shh, she said. I'm glad it was you, he said. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. And that seemed to be sufficient. The following afternoon she went to speak to Kyle Trent. Lund had said she could. He hadn't said she should. He had just told her which cabin and left it at that. She knocked. One of the ship's crew opened the door. She went in. Trent was sitting on his bunk. He hadn't been mistreated. The cabin was the same as any other crew cabin on the vessel. Someone had left a tray of food that was partially eaten. He looked up when she came in. His expression didn't change much. She sat in the single chair. They looked at each other for a moment. I'm not here to get anything from you, she said. You don't have to say anything. He was quiet. I just want to understand one thing, she said. You're good at your job. Everything in your service record, you're genuinely good at what you do. So I want to understand how you got here. He looked at the floor for a moment, then, my brother, he said. She waited. He was a naval officer, good one. He had information that showed something, a procurement irregularity, a contract fraud case in the 2020s. He was going to report it. Trent paused. He was encouraged not to, his strongly encouraged. When he went ahead anyway, not dramatically, just ended, reassigned, sidelined. Everything dried up. He paused again. A year later, Moore's office reached out to me. Through an intermediary, they knew about my brother. They made it clear that what happened to him could be reversed or made permanent. Depending on my cooperation on certain things, the cabin was quiet. You protected your brother, she said. I told myself that, he said. For a while, he looked up. Then I was on a ship in the middle of the Pacific, watching a torpedo track toward a woman 4,000 meters underwater, and I had to decide whether I still believed that. She held his gaze. You transmitted anyway, she said. I'd already transmitted, he said, before the torpedo. I reported your position when you started the descent. He paused. By the time the torpedo came, it was already done. All I could do was hope the countermeasure worked. He looked at the floor again. I'm not asking you to understand that. She sat with it. Your brother's situation, she said. Tell the committee. When this goes to testimony, tell them about it. How it worked. How Moore's people operated. That's part of the record, too. He looked at her. You'd want my testimony, he said. After what I did. Your testimony about how the leverage worked, how they recruited people, how they maintained compliance. That's important, she said. Not for you. For the next time someone tries to do this, he was quiet for a long time. I'll think about it. He said. She stood up. She paused at the door. What happened to the Arlington wasn't your fault, she said. What happened this morning wasn't something I can overlook, but they're not the same thing. She looked at him. The difference matters. She left. They came into Puget Sound at dusk. Mara stood on the forward deck and watched the Washington coast emerge from the evening light. The dark green of the firs on the hillsides, the gray water of the Sound, the distant lights of the towns along the eastern shore. After days of open Pacific, the enclosed water of the Sound felt almost sheltered. almost like something that would hold you. Lund came to stand beside her. They watched the land approach. Moore knows we're coming, he said. Yes, he'll have made calls today. Tried to arrange something. He'll have tried, she said. But he's working against a subpoena and a time-stamped transmission record and a retrieval module with verified chain of custody. She paused. He can try to delay. He can't stop it. Lund was quiet. When we dock, he said, there may be people on that pier who are there for reasons we don't know yet. I know. I'll be with you. She looked at him. He was looking at the coast. His face was set. Not anxious, decided. The expression of a man who has worked out exactly where he stands and has accepted the weight of that position. You understand what this costs you, she said. Yes, the disobeyed order, the secured team member. The change, of course, without authorization. She paused. That's a serious accounting. It is, he said. Are you prepared for it? He was quiet for a moment. I've been in this service for 18 years since, he said. I've followed orders that I trusted because I trusted the people who gave them. Signed things without asking why. He paused. I'm not going to do that anymore. Whatever that costs, he paused again. 11 people deserve someone to stand up and say, this was wrong. What happened to them was wrong. And if I'm the person standing here when that needs to be said, then I'll say it. She looked back at the water. Walter would like you, she said. A small pause. Tell me about him sometime, Lund said. When this is over, I will, she said. The Langford came into the station at 7:41 in the evening. The pier was not empty. There were, as Lund had predicted, people there. 2 vehicles with government plates, 4 individuals in civilian clothes who had the bearing of people who had been sent somewhere official for unofficial reasons. There was also a woman in a navy blue blazer holding a lanyard with a Senate seal. She was standing slightly apart from the others, the patient certainty of someone who had been told to be there and knew exactly why. She made eye contact with Mara across the dock as the gangway was lowered. She gave a small nod. Mara gave a small nod back. The individuals in civilian clothes approached the gangway first. One of them identified himself to the ship's duty officer. He had an authorization document. He began describing, in procedural language, a hold on the retrieval data pending a NAVSEA security review. Lund stepped off the gangway. He was still in his uniform. He had put it back on and noticed. Approximately 2 hours before they docked. He looked at the man with the authorization document. I'm Lieutenant Commander Garrett Lund, Dev Rue, he said. His voice was level and carrying. This vessel is completing a mission authorized by NAVSEA and supported by a congressional subpoena. The individual you are attempting to detain is a named witness to a subcommittee hearing scheduled for 0900 tomorrow. Any interference with that witness constitutes obstruction of a congressional proceeding. He paused. I suggest you call your legal counsel before you proceed further. The man with the document looked at him, then looked at the woman in the blazer. The woman in the blazer walked forward. She produced her own identification. Senate Armed Services Committee, Senior Investigative Counsel. She handed it to the man with the document. Ms. Calloway, she said to Mara over the man's shoulder. I'm Helen Graves, Subcommittee Counsel. We're ready for you. We have a secure vehicle. The man with the document looked at his colleague. His colleague made a phone call. They waited. The phone call ended. The man with the document said nothing for a moment. Then he stepped back. Mara walked down the gangway. Past the government vehicles, past the men in civilian clothes, past the weight of 11 years of carefully maintained silence, she walked to Helen Graves's vehicle. She got in at the same hour, in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Pentagon's E-Ring. Vice Admiral Harlan Moore was presenting the final briefing slides of a naval acquisition review to a room of 12 senior officers and 2 congressional liaisons. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. 30 years of rooms like this one, the right language, the right posture, the right calibrated confidence that makes people trust you without knowing exactly why. His aide entered quietly, crossed to his side, bent down. Moore did not change expression. He finished his sentence, set down his pointer. Excuse me for one moment, he said. He stepped to the side of the room. His aide handed him a phone showing a news alert. Not from a major outlet yet, just a Capitol Hill monitoring service. A subcommittee session. A witness. A recording recovered from the Pacific. He read the first 3 lines. He did not read further. He stood very still for approximately 4 seconds. The kind of stillness that looks like composure from the outside. That is not composure. Then he handed the phone back to his aide. He returned to the table. He picked up his pointer. He looked at the room full of people who did not yet know what he knew, that the next slide and all the slides after it were already irrelevant. He gave the briefing anyway. It was all he knew how to do. The hearing room was formal and small, not the large committee chamber she might have imagined, the kind with tiered seating and camera banks and a gallery full of journalists. This was a subcommittee session, 8 members, a long table, a single witness chair, court reporter in the corner. Staff seated along the walls, no cameras, no public gallery. This was deliberate. Helen Graves had explained it the night before, in the secure facility where Mara had spent the night before the hearing. "We're not trying this in the press," Graves had said. "Not yet. What we need first is the record, the complete documented, verified record. Everything on the record, with chain of custody established, before anything goes public." She had paused. "Once the record exists, once it's in a congressional file that can't be sealed or suppressed, then the public piece follows naturally. But the record has to come first," Mara had agreed. She sat in the witness chair at 9:03 in the morning. 8 committee members faced her across the table. The chairman, a senator from Maine with a measured, unhurried manner, opened the session. She was sworn in. She stated her name, her professional background, her connection to Ariel and to Walter Hayes, and to the events of March 17, 2013. She described the detection parameters she had embedded in the NOAA monitoring grid, the call at 2:14 in the morning, the trip to Coronado, the boarding of the Langford, 4 days at sea. She described the descent. She described 4,112 meters. She described finding the device, the SubSafe Type 7, the identification plate, USS Arlington SSN 785. She described the torpedo, the countermeasure, the detonation 180 meters from her position in the dark. She described the retrieval module, the audio file. The chairman leaned forward. "You have the recording with you?" he said. "I do," she said. She produced the retrieval module from the bag beside her chair. She had carried it herself, in her hand or on her person, since the moment she stepped off the Langford. It had not been out of her possession. She connected it to the secure playback system that the committee's technical staff had prepared. The room went very quiet. She played the recording, confirm receipt of authorization from VC No. Proceed with termination of Quiet Waiter protocols. Full record suppression. No survivors. The room was absolutely still. "My name is Lieutenant Commander David Rice, Executive Officer, USS Arlington. The time is 0242, March 17, 2013. She watched the faces of the committee members as they listened, not for dramatic effect. She watched them the way she had watched instruments during a dive, for the information they provided, for the readings they gave of what was happening inside. What she saw was not surprise. Several of them had been building toward this for 14 months. They had the financial records, the communication logs, the background testimony. They had known something was there. They had known the shape of it. What they were feeling now was confirmation, the particular, heavy, settling quality of a thing you have suspected for a long time finally being proven true. The recording ended. Silence. The chairman looked at his colleagues. Then back at her. "Miss Calloway," he said. "The committee thanks you for your testimony, for what it took to be here today." She looked at him. "Thank David Reese," she said. "He's the reason there's anything to hear." The proceedings lasted 4 hours. She answered questions. She walked the committee through the technical aspects of the retrieval, the acoustic countermeasure, the chain of custody on the data. Graves asked clarifying questions at strategic intervals, filling in the legal framework around each piece of its evidence, ensuring that every element of the record was established correctly. At 1:17 in the afternoon, the session ended. She walked out of the hearing room and into a corridor, found a bench along the wall and sat on it. She sat there for a few minutes, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting, letting the building be quiet around her. Helen Graves came out after a few minutes. She sat beside her. "It's going to take time," Graves said. "You understand that. The committee has to review the record, verify the data, consult with DOD Legal. Moore has attorneys. There will be processes." "I know," Mara said, "but the record exists now," Graves said. "The audio is in a congressional file. The retrieval module is in evidence custody. The chain of custody is established." She paused. "That doesn't go away. Whatever happens next, that doesn't go away." Mara nodded. "The 11 crew members of the Arlington," Graves said carefully. "They're Lampley's?" "I have a list," Mara said. She reached into her bag, produced an envelope. 11 names. Next of kin contacts where I was able to find them. Some of them have been told nothing. Some of them were given a cover story. She held out the envelope. They deserve to know the truth. Not through the press. Through someone who can sit with them and explain it properly. Graves took the envelope. She held it carefully, the way she had held the authorization documents the previous evening on the dock. with the awareness of what a thing weighs. "We'll reach out," she said. "We'll do it right," Mara nodded. Lund was waiting in the corridor outside. He was still in uniform. He had been in the building all morning, in a separate room, giving his own account to a different member of the committee staff. His own testimony about the mission, the order he had received from Moore, his decision not to comply with it, everything that had happened on the Langford from the moment they departed San Diego. He looked, when she came out, like a man who had been carrying something heavy all morning and had just set it down. Not lighter exactly, but different, the particular look of a man who has done what needed to be done and is now simply living with having done it. She sat on the bench. He sat beside her. They were quiet for a moment. "How did it go?" she said. "They listened," he said. "They asked good questions." Pause. The JAG officer they had in the room, she asked about the disobeyed order. "About the authority I had to change course without authorization." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I made a judgment call," he said, "that the order I received appeared to be designed to suppress evidence of a crime rather than to protect a legitimate operational interest, and that I made the decision I was trained to make when those two things came into conflict." He paused. "Whether that's sufficient legally, I don't know yet." She looked at him. "It's sufficient morally," she said. He was quiet. "Yes," he said. "It is." Sat for a moment, in the easy quiet of people who have said the necessary things and don't need to fill the space after. Then Lund said, "Trent asked to speak to the committee council this morning, before his session. He told them about his brother." Mara looked at him. "He named two other people Moore's office had leveraged the same way," Lund said. "Over a 10-year period." He paused. "Graves said it was some of the most useful testimony they received." Mara was quiet. "He made a choice," she said finally. "He made another one." "Yes," Lund said. "That matters," she said. "It does," he said. "It doesn't fix anything, but it matters." They sat for a moment. Then Lund said, "Moore." She looked at him. "Chairman will refer the recording to DODOIG and the Department of Justice," he said. "That process will take months. Moore has attorneys and resource and 30 years of institutional relationships." He paused. "He's not going to go quietly." "No," she said. "He's not. Are you prepared for that?" She thought about it. "I've been preparing for 3 years," she said. "For getting the record established. For making sure the truth existed in a form that couldn't be destroyed." She paused. "I'm prepared for whatever comes after that to take the time it takes. Justice isn't always fast." She paused again. "But it has to start somewhere. It started today." He nodded. He looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for Ariel. I know you said I didn't know what I was signing, and I believe that's true, but not knowing isn't the same as being without responsibility." He paused. "I should have asked why. I should have," she said. He stopped. "You couldn't have known," she said. "The system was built specifically so you couldn't know. That's not an excuse for the system, but it's the truth about you." She paused. "What you did on this mission, from the moment you didn't respond to Moore's abort order, that's the accounting that matters." He was quiet. "Is it enough?" he said. She held his gaze. "For me, yes," she said. "For the institutional record, that's for other people to determine. But from where I'm sitting," she paused. "Yes, it's enough," he exhaled. He sat in the corridor of the federal building while the afternoon light came through the high windows and the sounds of the building moved around them. Footsteps, distant voices, the ordinary noise of an institution going about its work. After a while, Mara said, "I need to call Walter." Lund nodded. She took out her phone. She dialed the number for the Coronado Veterans Care Center. Patricia answered on the third ring. "This is Mara Calloway," she said. "I'm calling for Walter Hayes." Room 15, a brief pause. "One moment. Calloway, hold music." 40 seconds. And then slowly, carefully, the way he did things now, the way everything came to him now, with a slight hesitation at the threshold, a moment of reaching. Mara, her eyes closed. He had recognized her. "Walter," she said. "I'm back." A long pause on his end. She could hear him breathing, could hear in the quality of his silence something she had only heard a few times over the years, a particular stillness deeper than his usual stillness. Stillness of a man arriving somewhere he had been moving toward for a very long time. "Did you find it?" he said. "I found it," she said. "It's in evidence. It's on the record. The committee has the audio." Another long pause. She heard him exhale, very slowly. The kind of exhale that carries something with it when it goes. "David Reese," he said. Very quietly, "He put his name in the recording," she said. "He knew someone would come. He left everything we needed. The silence on the line was the longest yet." She waited. She would wait as long as it took. She had learned how to wait. Then Walter said, and his voice when he said it was as steady and clear as she had ever heard it. "Tell them who they were, I will," she said. "I promise." She heard him breathe. And then, so quiet she almost missed it. "Good girl." She sat with the phone pressed against her ear for a moment after the line went quiet. Lund was watching her. He didn't say anything. She lowered the phone, looked at the windows, at the gray-white Washington sky beyond them. Somewhere, 11 families did not yet know what had happened to the people they had lost. Somewhere, a vice admiral was in a room with his attorneys, beginning the process of defending the indefensible. Somewhere, the mechanisms of accountability were beginning to move, slowly, imperfectly, with all the friction and delay that institutional processes carry. Somewhere in Coronado, a 71-year-old man was sitting by a window, and maybe the tide of his memory was still in, and he was understanding what had just happened, and maybe it wasn't, and he was simply sitting in the quiet with something he couldn't name but could feel. Either way, he was not carrying it alone anymore. None of them were. She stood up, straightened her jacket. Lund stood beside her, he said. She thought about that now. She said, "We go and do the next thing, simple. Direct. The way Walter had always said it, not everything at once, not the whole weight of what still needed to happen, just the next thing. Then the thing after that, one step at a time, the way you move at 4,112 meters, deliberately, carefully, making sure of each placement before you commit to the next." They walked down the corridor together, through the doors, out into the afternoon. The sky above Naval Station Everett was gray and bright, the particular Pacific Northwest light that carries the ocean in it even when you can't see the water. Cold air, salt underneath everything, the smell of a coast that has been here longer than anyone walking on it. She stood on the steps for a moment, breathed. They left her at sea. That was what the story would say, eventually, when the record was public, when the families had been told, when the full weight of what had happened 11 years ago in the deep Pacific had been brought into the light. They left her at sea, and she had gone back down and gotten what they buried. She had gone down alone, in the dark, at a depth that the human body was never designed to reach, into a silence so complete it had a texture. She had found the thing they had tried to make unfindable. She had brought it up. She had put it on a table in front of 8 senators and said, "Here, this is what happened. These are the names," and she had done it not for herself, not out of anger, though anger had been part of it early on. Not for recognition, for 11 people who deserved better than silence, for Walter, who had carried the weight of knowing for 11 years and had chosen, instead of breaking under it, to pass it to someone who could carry it further, for David Rice, who had spoken into the dark not knowing if anyone would ever hear him and had been right to trust that someone would. She looked out at the sound. The gray water, the dark line of the far shore, the ocean from here was calm. Lund stood beside her. He didn't say anything. He had the quality, she had noticed, of knowing when silence was more useful than speech. She was grateful for that. After a moment, she reached into her jacket pocket. She pulled out the challenge coin, held it in her palm, the anchor with wings on one face, the 11 names on the other, the single word in the center of the circle. Remember, she looked at it for a long time. Then she closed her fingers around it, held it, kept it. She closed her fingers around the coin, kept it. Walter had carried this for 11 years before he found someone to carry it with him. Reese had spoken into the dark, hoping someone would eventually listen, and she had gone down into the deepest, coldest silence on Earth to make sure they were both right. The coin was not a memorial. It was a direction forward, the Pacific, 4,112 meters below the surface. The sediment has drifted back. The hollow where the device rested for 11 years is filling in, slowly, gently, the way the deep ocean fills everything. With patience, with time, with a quiet accumulation of what falls from the world above, the device is gone now. But the silence where it rested is different from the silence before. It is not the silence of something hidden. It is the silence of something that has been found. David Reese spoke into the dark. Someone heard him. That is enough. That has always been enough.